Live from Washington, D.C., this is Balance of Power with Joe Mathieu.
January 6th edition, as President Trump gathers the family at the Kennedy Center to talk midterm strategies exactly 5 years after the attack on the Capitol. I'm Joe Mathieu alongside Tyler Kendall in Washington. Thanks for joining us here on this Tuesday. The president, Tyler, addressing the House Republican Conference about midterm strategies, along with a number of other topics, including where we go next in Venezuela.
Right. The president appearing to balance the domestic with the foreign policy, as polling has repeatedly told us that the economy, of course, is the top issue for Americans, as Republicans are going into this year with incredibly slim margins. Right now, we're looking at Republicans with 218 to 213 votes for Democrats. That means that they right now have a 2-vote margin to pass anything during this year. Yeah,
that's right. We're going to be talking a little bit more about that with our political panel and an important conversation straight ahead with John Bolton. Tyler, awfully important here as we try to figure out the motivations of this administration when it comes to Venezuela, but also the rest of the hemisphere, and also what the fallout might be for China and Iran, both of which have been mentioned repeatedly since the strikes on Saturday and the capture of Nicolas Maduro.
Right. We've been talking all week on Balance of Power about the geopolitical implications here, particularly as we have some pretty incredible reporting on the Bloomberg terminal this morning. People familiar telling us that the White House feels that Delcy Rodriguez is best equipped to bridge the gap between the government and the private sector, as it really appears that the administration has its sights set on revitalizing the Venezuelan oil sector. Yeah,
this is a pretty remarkable moment that we're in. And Wall Street, of course, has all of this in mind, and it really hasn't caused even a hiccup in trading. You saw the monster rally we enjoyed yesterday. Not a lot different today. The S&P 500 up about 0.5% or 33 points. The NASDAQ is up 100 points, 0.5%. The Dow adding another 428 points today, almost 1%. We're getting the Santa Claus rally maybe a little bit late, but investors do not seem terribly concerned with geopolitics at the moment. John Bolton, I'm sure, has some ideas about this, though, and it's a great pleasure to have the former national security advisor with us from President Trump's first term, former U.S. ambassador to the United Nations and founder of the Foundation for American Security and Freedom. John Bolton, welcome back to Bloomberg TV and radio. I know you have strong feelings about this, and you've been around the block when it comes to Venezuela in the first term. Can I just start by asking you if you think the administration acted correctly last weekend?
Well, I think it was the right thing to do to begin the process of getting the Maduro regime out of power and turning the government of Venezuela back over to the people. There's no doubt that in 2024, as in 2018, Maduro stole the election. The opposition had won legitimately and really are the legitimate government of Venezuela. But I think we've removed Maduro, but the regime is still there. There's no regime change at this point. And I'm very concerned that the way the president attacked Maria Corina Machado, the leader of the opposition, said she didn't have respect in the country. Really, the opposition wasn't up to governing, and turning to the likes of Delcy Rodriguez and really Maduro's henchmen and henchwomen who are still there and believing they're going to be a transition. It puts us in a very difficult position. I'm worried that we've removed the face of the regime, but not the regime itself.
Right. Yeah. Well, to that end, I know that you had concerns about Maduro in the president's first term, and we did a little bit of digging on this. Having had sat down with Maduro, my colleague Eric Schatzker in 2021 traveled to Caracas to talk to him about global politics. And Maduro said at the time he was in talks with the first Trump administration with you, John Bolton, around a meeting at the UN General Assembly in 2018. Maduro specifically implicated you as having canceled that meeting. Listen to what he told us in 2021.
I was about to personally meet him on September 2018 with President Donald Trump when I went to the UN General Assembly in New York. We got a call from the White House, but we knew about John Bolton's pressure and that of other people around Donald Trump to prevent his attempt to meet me. If we had met, it had been a different story today.
John Bolton, is that true? And to what extent, if so, did that moment inform Donald Trump's views on Venezuela today?
Well, I wish it were true. I wish I could stop meetings like that easily, but he's making that up. But it's a good story. So if he wants to believe it, let him tell that to the court.
Ambassador Bolton, if we're looking at what is going to happen next here, there's a lot of different messaging, a lot of different rhetoric. We hear from President Trump that the U.S. is going to run Venezuela. But if we look at what other advisors are saying, we keep hearing the idea that there's a lot of leverage points here by the U.S. The embargo on oil, the military armada poised, still potentially pointing at Venezuela. Do you think that the U.S. has enough leverage to make change in Venezuela from afar through these kind of pressure points?
Well, I'd like to know what the plan is, if that's what they think they're going to do. I'd be the happiest person around if the rest of the Maduro regime collapsed tomorrow. But when you hear from the administration, the usual anonymous sources, that they think they can work with Delcy Rodriguez to transition to something, I don't know what the something is, and that the Venezuelan oil industry is just going to emerge from the ashes and suddenly be a big producer again, I think people are dreaming. I think this is a very difficult and dangerous situation. I think that the administration has acted in an ad hoc, day-to-day fashion. That doesn't guarantee failure, but let's be clear, if the objective is to turn Venezuela into a society where its people actually govern it, and maybe that's not Trump's intention, but if that is, they're a long way from it. And anybody who thinks the Venezuelan oil industry is going to emerge from the ashes in a matter of weeks or months or even a couple of years doesn't know how bad the situation is.
So then what is it going to take to help fuel that turnaround? Because we have reporting, as we mentioned at the top of the show, people familiar telling Bloomberg News that part of why this White House thinks that it can work with Delcy Rodriguez is because she could serve as that bridge between the government and the private sector, because it seems like there has to be such an emphasis on potential investment and rebuilding the infrastructure in order for Venezuela to get on sound economic footing.
Well, I don't know what they base that on, and I'd like to know what CEO of what major American oil company is just getting all of his top advisors together to get on a plane to go to Caracas and put billions and billions of capital expenditures into Venezuela. The political situation is unstable. By the way, the price of oil is still at $55 to $60 a barrel. I'm not sure anybody thinks that more capital investment, more drilling, more oil on the market is going to benefit the oil companies at this point. I think there's a lot of hot air out there about what's going on, and that's dangerous because if your planning is not based on reality, when reality finally strikes, you have no plan B to back up to.
You mentioned Maria Corina Machado. She turned up on Fox News last evening, of all places, on the Hannity program, presumably to get the attention of Donald Trump. Here's what she said.
I'm planning to go back to Venezuela as soon as possible. As I've always said, Sean, every day I make a decision where I am more useful for a cause. That's why I stayed in hiding for over 16 months, and that's why I decided to go out, because I believed that at this moment I'm more useful to our cause, being able to speak out from where I am right now. But I'm planning to go as soon as possible back home.
She's talking about sharing her Nobel Peace Prize somehow with Donald Trump. Could she be a partner, or has the administration turned away from her permanently?
Well, I think they damaged her and the opposition very badly on Saturday. I think the opposition, just ordinary people inside Venezuela, wonder what it means when the U.S. doesn't trust its leadership. Now, maybe she can work her way back into his good graces. My recommendation would be giving the Nobel Peace Prize medal that you get. The Nobel Foundation can make another one just for you, but give it to Trump. Otherwise, you know what he's going to do. Theodore Roosevelt won the Nobel Peace Prize for mediating the war between Russia and Japan during his term as president. And his Nobel Prize hangs on the wall of the Roosevelt Room in the White House. I've been worried recently Trump's just going to take it off the wall so he can have it for himself. So Mrs. Machado gives him hers. Maybe that'll take care of that.
We also want to talk about potential ripple effects here. What could come next when it comes to other countries? And I'm actually particularly interested about the potential impacts for China, of course, a huge importer of Venezuelan crude. But China's made a lot of significant inroads when it comes to Latin America, signing on signatories to its Belt and Road infrastructure initiatives. Could this hurt Beijing's efforts to make those inroads in Latin America? How is this changing the calculus in terms of the U.S.-Beijing competition?
Well, I think the most important American strategic interest in Venezuela is the increasing influence of maligned foreign powers that don't have the best interest of the United States at heart. That certainly starts with Russia and Cuba. That was the main problem back in 2018 and 2019. But Iran and China are big players on the scene now. And as you say, China has an enormous concern with Venezuela's oil reserves and its production. The Chinese look for oil wherever they can find it. They're an energy poor country whose economy depends on getting these foreign sources. And by most estimates, including the estimates of the U.S. government, Venezuela has the largest oil reserves in the world, more even than Saudi Arabia. And yet it produces an insignificant amount of oil. Of that oil it produces, China buys about 80% of the production, according to the most recent statistics. So I don't think Beijing is going to sit idly by while a new government comes in that may be more hospitable to American investment and possibly exclude China from the Venezuelan reserve. So what China is doing behind the scenes, we don't know. There were high-level Chinese meeting with Maduro literally within a day or two of his being grabbed over the weekend. And what policies China is pursuing, what aid it may be giving to what remains of the Maduro government, what Russia and Cuba and Iran are doing, we don't know. But I don't think they're just going to withdraw quietly from the scene.
Well, as we consider what many are now referring to as the Dunroe Doctrine, John Bolton, I wonder who you think should worry more right now, Greenland or Iran?
Well, I think Iran should be more worried given the protests which continue to grow all across Iran, not just in Tehran. This regime in Tehran is very weak. And I think the levels of discontent in the country have never been higher. And the world would be a lot safer if the regime of the Ayatollahs fell and you could get some kind of alternative, hopefully free government in Iran. I think what Trump says about Greenland and his interest in taking control of Greenland is very harmful to the NATO alliance. Greenland, part of Denmark, is a NATO ally. Denmark's been an ally of the United States for years, and you have advisors to the president saying on national television that Denmark's claim to the island is illegitimate, and nobody will oppose American force if we decide to use it. If we did, it would destroy the NATO alliance. But even this chatter is irresponsible, isn't taking into account the real threats we face in the United States. We have a legitimate security interest in Greenland. So does the entire NATO alliance. And if we just took this out of the spotlight and worked cooperatively together, I think we could ensure greater security, not just for Greenland, but for the entire alliance.
All right, John Bolton, former national security advisor in President Trump's first term, former U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, and founder of the Foundation for American Security and Freedom. Ambassador Bolton, thanks so much for joining us here on Bloomberg Television and Radio. And we want to extend the conversation by bringing in our political panel, Rick Davis, partner at Stonecourt Capital and Bloomberg Politics contributor, alongside Jeanne Zaino, also Bloomberg Politics contributor and democracy visiting fellow at Harvard Kennedy School Ash Center. Rick, let's start with you and get your reaction to what we were hearing from John Bolton there, and this idea of what the viable path is for the Venezuelan government going forward, as it appears that the Trump administration is set to work with Delcy Rodriguez, but she is an extension of the prior regime under Nicolas Maduro.
Yeah, it's always nice to hear the clear-eyed analysis of John Bolton. His experience around the globe is second to none. So kudos to the interview. I thought it was fantastic. The reality is that the more reporting we get on little-known Delcy Rodriguez is that she's been very friendly with the energy companies, the oil companies that have been doing business, specifically Chevron, in the country. And so it's no surprise that if the priority is oil, in the redevelopment of those fields, then she sort of fits the bill. President Trump did give the backhand to the democratically elected party headed by Maria Machado, and I'm glad to hear based on the interview that you played a clip from, that she's planning on coming back to Venezuela because I think the Venezuela people chose her and her party to lead the country. And I think the sooner she gets back and can rally that activity around maybe a future election, I think it can add to the future stability of the country. But look, this is a administration that has identified critical natural resources in Venezuela, not just oil, as a national security priority, and they've used the might of the U.S. military to secure those. And I think Donald Trump's point of view is, I want as little domestic turmoil as I can get in achieving those ends. And so I think that's the scenario that we're dealing with on the ground.
Well, hang on, Jeanne, because I'm guessing that Maria Machado is reading this right now. A post on Twitter, on X, from Senator Rick Scott, of course, of Florida. Quote, Delcy Rodriguez is not the president of Venezuela. She is simply another corrupt leader of the Maduro regime. Would do well to remember that any steps she takes outside of the U.S. wishes will result in the same fate as her former partner in crime, Maduro. Is this a senator speaking to his own constituents in Florida, or representing a larger view in the Republican Party?
It clearly is a senator who has not checked his statement with the White House or the president, because that is almost precisely in opposition to what the president has said. And, you know, I think what John Bolton aptly described was a lot of magical thinking, and Rick Scott's statement is just in line with that. If you are going to seriously democratize a country, you can't leave in place Maduro's right-hand woman, her brother, and the rest of the security apparatus. So that suggests this has nothing to do with democratization. And Donald Trump, unlike his Secretary of State, isn't pretending it does. He's saying this is all about oil. Well, there's the second part of the magical thinking. And John Bolton mentioned this. The fact is that it would take decades to do anything to convince oil companies to go into a country that is right now this politically insecure, with a senator from the United States saying, we can't even agree on who's leading the country. To John Bolton's point, what executive of a major oil company is going to say, now's the time to go and invest in that? Chevron's not investing. China is trying to pull out. Exxon never wanted to go back in after it was nationalized. It just took over Mobil. So this thing would take decades, if it's about oil, for the United States to reap those benefits. If the president is planning on doing what he also said, which is to investing millions and billions of U.S. taxpayer money into this project to pay oil companies and oil executives to do this, that's going to create enormous pushback, even amongst Republicans, who may be fine with going in against the law to this country, but not taking their hard-earned tax dollars to pay off oil executives to go in there and extract oil from another country. So this thing is full of magical thinking. It's fraught. The operation may have been a success, but the day two questions loom large, and it will disintegrate support in the long term.
Well, let's talk about the domestic political ramifications, Rick, because to Joe's point and the post from Rick Scott, it feels like Republicans are threading the needle here between being in favor of Nicolas Maduro no longer being in power, but treading carefully when it comes to what they want to see happen next with this transition to democracy. We heard House Speaker Mike Johnson saying yesterday that he hopes that happens quickly. If we look ahead, we're now in campaign season. President Trump rallying support among House Republicans earlier today. Is foreign policy going to be a winning issue as we go into the midterms? How should Republicans be thinking about this?
Well, first of all, I think it should be said that Republicans are favorable toward democracies in Venezuela, in the United States, and anywhere else. I don't think that's a big issue. I think what you see with Senator Scott is a very determined senator from a state with a lot of Venezuelan expatriates living there, many of whom vote in the state, and he's doing the right thing for his constituencies. And it doesn't matter what the White House does. Politics always starts at home for these guys. And that being said, to your second question, which is how does all this play in the midterms? I don't think it really does. You'd have to dig pretty deep to find a winning foreign policy issue that helps the party in power. In an election, voters tend to vote their pocketbook. We've spent a lot of time on this program talking about affordability and healthcare. It's much more likely that drives people to the polls in November midterms than anything that happens momentarily in a faraway country like Venezuela, where most normal voters don't see a nexus between what's happening there in their lives. And frankly, this administration really isn't making a nexus to that. They really aren't selling the idea that somehow by being able to control the flow of oil out of Venezuela, that somehow your gas prices are going to go down or somehow going to make your life better. So if the administration doesn't invest in that, it's highly unlikely anybody else will. And that means it probably won't have much of an impact in the midterm elections.
Great conversation with our great panel, Rick Davis and Jeanne Zaino, Bloomberg Politics contributors. We thank you both, and thanks again to John Bolton for the insights. We'll be following up on a lot of these ideas in the late edition of Balance of Power, which starts at 5 p.m. Eastern Time. One of the biggest stories that we have been following in the last 24 hours, though, of course, has been the important keynote address from Jensen Huang at the Consumer Electronics Show. It has been feeding a number of storylines and moving the stock ever since that took place in Las Vegas yesterday. And joining us right now for a very special conversation, we've got good news for you, is Bloomberg's Ed Ludlow with the CEO of Nvidia, Jensen Huang, as well as the president CEO of Siemens, Roland Busch. They're at the CES right now. And we want to hand things out to Las Vegas. Ed Ludlow, you have the con.
Thank you, Joe. Over 175 years, Siemens has been at the forefront of, I'd say, several industrial revolutions. Nvidia is at the forefront of the latest AI industrial revolution, and it's a pleasure to have you both here with us, gentlemen. Roland, I want to try and understand how real this is. You call it an industrial AI operating system. Yes. We're going to talk about how you're joining forces on the software side and the hardware side. But I think the most useful place to start would be, could you outline a timeline for when Siemens goes beyond its own footprint around the world using this operating system to customers actually doing things at scale? Because I think when you were on stage, that's the kind of sense I was getting. You want to accelerate to scale.
Well, I mean, this technology is already in place and it's working. I mean, we see that in many examples, and I brought some on stage today, where you have customers starting with a digital twin of a product they want to manufacture, a digital twin of the manufacturing side, and bring that all together, and not before that you have it optimized and build it in the real world. And AI is already working on the shop floor. They call it machine learning. But the point is, with the new models, you can bring that to the next level. That means you go away from giving an advice to somebody with technology, but really act on your behalf. This is when things go more autonomous or adaptive. And you see that already starting. The big thing is, how can we scale it? Because it requires a lot of skills from our customers, a lot of technology, and it's still not that easy to implement. We are working on it to make it easy to deploy and easy to use. But you see picking up momentum with each step we do. And we saw some great examples. Is it shipbuilding? Is it food and beverage? But even startups using our technology like Commonwealth Fusion Systems.
You know, Jensen, we've discussed the 5-layer cake often. You know, with Nvidia, it started with the GPUs, but it's now software. The element of simulation. On stage, you talked about integrating the software side in particular into EDA. Again, it's a similar question for you, more of a timeline. What is it that you think you'll do first in how you guys work closer together?
Well, the first thing let me just say very quickly, we're announcing a big partnership between us. We've known each other for a long time, but the partnership we're announcing is really a big deal. One, we're accelerating their EDA software. We're accelerating their simulation software. We're integrating AI technology, physical AI and agentic AI, into their team center and their factory automation operating system. And so we're working together across this entire spectrum. When we accelerate the software, then we'll get to use it to design our chips and systems. When we accelerate their simulation software, we'll use it in our AI factories to simulate the thermal properties of our AI factories. When we integrate our automation and agentic systems into their AI industrial operating system, we can then use it in our factory floors with our partners, for example, Foxconn. And so we're working across this entire spectrum together, and we're going to put the technology to use basically as soon as we can.
What's the net effect for you, Jensen? Is it improves margins, efficient capital allocation? I know that might sound a bit dry, but actually right now that's the answer everyone's searching for. How has this investment in AI and use of the technology actually changed things in the real world for me?
Well, we announced yesterday Vera Rubin. It takes 6 different chips to integrate into this incredible system called Vera Rubin. And when you're done, each one of these Vera Rubin GPUs is 240,000 watts. And it is 10 times more energy efficient than the last generation. It is 10 times more cost efficient than the last generation. But it's still, the technology is insanely complicated. 15,000 engineering years came together to build this system. And so when we accelerate EDA tools, when we accelerate simulation tools, and when we can eventually, and I'm hoping very soon, design entire Vera Rubin systems inside a Siemens digital twin, the ability for us to create much, much more complex systems will scale. We'll do it much more efficiently. And so this is really about being able to do the impossible and being able to do it the impossible right the first time.
And let me add, once we then realize that AI creates real-world impact, this is where it really deploys the full power and also the economic power. It's not only in the data centers or in AI factories, which we see, but also on the edge, because once you start inferencing with low latency, you bring this technology to the edge. This is a huge potential for our customers to deploy this technology, and this includes, of course, hardware. Where we come from the chips. It goes into the controllers. Some of our controllers run on GPUs.
Yes.
And then it goes all the way to the
call it industrial PC.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And we
now these industrial PCs are AI industrial PCs.
We supercharge it, and they can now run algorithms trained in the cloud. They can run it on the shop floor and do all that trick, what we talked about it in real-time optimization and running in a plant. And that makes a huge difference.
Again,
it drives economic growth.
The question that's being searched for is how is this going to manifest in the real world? You know, the emphasis at this year's CS, I think, is physical AI. Is not the manifestation of the final stage of physical AI just one giant robot that you guys call a factory in the manufacturing context? Is that where you're seeing demand from actual customers? You know, they need a factory that is automated 100% and genuinely autonomous in some degree.
So number one is if you want to build a factory, and very often you're missing out on labor, and we talk about on skilled labor. It's hard to find, number one. Number two is once you build it autonomous and automated, then you have a much, much higher yield, what you can generate. You use less energy, by the way, at the same time. You really optimize it in a way. So therefore, there's a lot of benefits. And if you want to talk about the United States, ramp up manufacturing in the United States, you need to go as digital and as automated and AI supercharged as possible.
A factory is robotic, and it is orchestrating robots that are building systems that are also robotic. Like, for example, a self-driving car is a robotic system. And the reason why it's so hard to deploy robots today is because it's hard to program these robotic systems. The software expertise necessary, the customization necessary is really intense. It's just too much. And so the fact that we could now apply artificial intelligence, physical AI technology to these robotic systems, make them easier to teach. You show it at a few demonstrations and the AI learned it by itself.
Would you go as far as to say, Jensen, that you've solved for that software limitation?
That software limitation is the ChatGPT moment of it is now here. I think over the course of the next couple, 2-3 years, we're going to make some really big breakthroughs.
Let's please talk about energy, electricity, power supply, call it what you will. In turn, for each of you, how worried are you about it as a bottleneck? And what is your experience day-to-day in running both companies in that respect?
Well, energy should always be a bottleneck for any industry. And this is a new industry that's growing incredibly fast. As you know, AI is both a technology that's going to revolutionize many applications, and we're talking about some of them here. But the AI industry itself, the manufacturing of the artificial intelligence takes energy. It takes energy, it takes AI factories. It's exactly the reason why from Hopper to Blackwell, we increased energy efficiency by 10x. From Blackwell to Rubin, we increased energy efficiency again by 10x. And that translates directly to our customers' revenues, because in the case of an AI factory, whatever factory size you have, you're limited by the power. And that power, within that power constraint, you want to have the most tokens or most AI per watt that you can possibly generate. And so every time we improve energy efficiency, we're effectively improving both the AI capabilities for our customers and their revenues, because they're always constrained by power.
The response to your keynote, and forgive me, Roland, 1 minute, was, Vera Rubin, 10x throughput, really important. Tokens generated at 1/10. But they'll still say, hey, Jensen, what if the electricity is just not there? It's not available.
Well, there's electricity. There's never enough electricity.
And my question is, what is the anxiety level for you both about that issue?
There's always energy. There's never enough energy. And this is every industrial revolution will be energy constrained, and this industrial revolution is also energy constrained. Now, one of the most important things, though, here speaking about the United States, if not for President Trump's pro-energy growth agenda, we would have a very hard time growing at all. In order for a new industry to emerge, you need energy. And so I think it's safe to say that we wish we had more energy in the United States. Europe wish it had more energy. I think the world all wish we had more energy. And so we have to invest in all sorts of different forms of energy. But whatever energy you have to make it as energy efficient as possible. And that's one of the reasons why both of us drive our technology roadmap so hard, because every single new generation of technology is more energy efficient than the last. That's kind of the nature of it.
You are in the AI factory. I won't say data center, because data center is where you store data, but you are in the AI factory supply chain. You must see it.
So what we see is, number one is you see that the energy demand is roughly scaling with the GDP growth. It's decoupling, because exactly of this effect that we are providing more and more efficient technology. So that means you are decoupling, but still it grows along with economic growth. And then on top comes a demand for data centers. They demand high quality of energy at the same time, which in some cases creates bottlenecks. Is it now from power generation? And to talk, is it either renewables or gas turbines? There's a huge bottleneck for gas turbines as we speak. It goes all the way to high voltage transformers, to medium voltage and to switch technologies. So therefore, you see along the whole supply chain, obviously, there's a huge demand. We are serving that. So there's a reason why this business of ours is growing extremely fast. We can keep up with the demand of our customers, but in some cases you might end up in bottlenecks. If you keep on going as fast as possible, it's a regional dependence. In some cases where you have good programs, good policies, you see that it's catching up along with the demand. In others, you might end up in a gap. But you see the demand is higher than supply chain, and we are ramping up.
It's been the case for a while now.
Which is ultimately the condition we want.
Yeah,
we want a condition where the demand is very strong, because there's great demand for new technology.
Specific to you, Jensen, how severe is the memory bottleneck right now?
Well, the memory bottleneck is severe, but we're fortunate to have worked with all, first of all, Nvidia is the only company that works with all three of the HBM suppliers, and all three of them are major customers and major suppliers of us, and so we have the good fortune of working with them for a very long period of time, and we've got things all planned out. It's going to be okay.
You've been asked a lot about China in the last 24 hours. I'm going to ask you a slightly different question. Okay. What is the attitude of the Chinese government in allowing H200 to go into the country? I understand the position on licenses, the administration here in the United States position, but what does China's government say to you about how they want to approach it?
I haven't spoken directly to them, but ultimately the way they'll communicate to us will be through the companies. If the companies are allowed to buy Nvidia products in China, then there'll be strong demand, and we're seeing strong demand. And so I think indirectly they've communicated with their companies.
I've learned a lot about Siemens' work in software, and I've always thought the word Siemens to be synonymous with industrial, manufacturing physical things. It's the same lesson we've been through recently with Nvidia, trying to understand actually the software competencies. Is that an area where we might see you be active in M&A? Think about what else you might need that you might not get from the Jensen and Nvidia partnership?
So you might, because we will increase our software competence, our software portfolio. Actually, it's a little bit short of 30 billion, which Siemens invested in M&A to build our software competence, which brings us to the point that.
Well, what's missing
today? Exactly. Today we can build the most comprehensive physics-based digital twin of whatever you want to build. Still, there are pieces in operational software which runs plans, where you can look into that. AI gives new spaces, obviously. We invested in Dotmatics. It's life science, so it's about molecules. We can imagine doing more there, also in simulation, but also building a data backbone for this life science industry. It's super relevant. We did it for other industries with Teamcenter. We repeat it now with Luma for life science, which is, again, shortening cycle times and reducing costs for life science and drugs and medicines. So, and I mean, the beauty of it is that we live in both worlds. We have the domain know-how. We know how to run things, how to operate, how to automate plans, buildings, grids, trains. And we have the software competence too, and that brings us in a unique position. And then we need strong partners, which have complementary technology, which is so amazing. If that comes together, you see matching things happen.
Well, Nvidia will have access to new technology on the inference side through Grok. I'm going to do my classic, Jensen, could you please clarify for me question, which is this an acquisition or is it a licensing deal spread over time? Because Jonathan and Sonny joined.
We hired 400 or something like that, a little bit less, incredible engineers. And we also licensed their technology. They designed an architecture that's very, very different than what we've done. And it's focused on low latency token generation. NVIDIA is incredibly good at inference, and we're great at training, post-training, as well as the inference phase and test time scaling of AI. And so we've got that space covered. I'm excited about some of the work that we might be able to do together to invent a new segment that might be able to address future use cases. And I haven't described it to people, but the time will come.
So Jonathan is kind of behind the TPU and the LPU. And, before all of this happened, there was Grok V2 and V3. And you know all of that. And it's leading to me to ask, what would that new platform or segment be? What is it that you're trying to build on with those?
I haven't told anybody yet.
But I'm here, Jensen. You can tell me.
I'm going to look in the camera and tell you that come to a GTC conference in the future, and I will tell you all the secrets.
I'm going to make a hard pivot because I have to. Data centers in space. I reported just before the holidays that the reason SpaceX wants to go public.
It's the first GPU in space.
Bear with me. The reason that SpaceX wants to raise $30-40 billion, whatever that is, needs to buy the GPUs. Have you discussed data centers in space with Elon and SpaceX, Jensen?
I can't discuss what I haven't told everybody I've discussed with anybody.
You think it's a viable technology platform?
Sure. I mean, there's lots of energy in space, right? And the cooling is abundant in space. And so the challenges of AI factories are different out in space.
It would be AI factories in space.
Yeah.
Forgive the ignorance almost, but are we literally talking about the same architecture for the GPU that goes into an AI factory, still just being able to go into kind of a satellite form factor?
Yeah, sure, but the way that you would cool it and power it would be very different. And so the system design will be radically different. The chips will be the same.
You're pretty concerned with data centers or AI factories here on Earth. Does Siemens see the need for or viability of such a technology?
I don't know whether we explored all potentials on Earth yet, but there's one beauty in this idea. Think about any kind of manufacturing which you want to bring to space. Everything what you produce, you want to bring down to Earth. It's hard if you do energy, how to bring it down to Earth. It's hard if you produce any kind of hardware, how to bring it down. But tokens, intelligence, I mean, you can transfer easily to Earth. So therefore, if I would produce something in space, I would start there.
We should talk about autonomous driving. Have you seen Elon Musk's response to your keynote yesterday?
No. What did he say?
Part one, in short, was, well, we were already doing that. Smiley emoji on X. The other part of...
And by the way, I wouldn't be surprised. first of all, I think the Tesla stack is the most advanced AV stack in the world, and I think the Tesla AV operations is the most advanced in the world, and I'm fairly certain that they were already using end-to-end AI.
Yes.
And whether their AI also did reasoning or not is somewhat secondary to that first part.
I think his point was that the first 99% is hard enough, but the long tail thereafter is important. You know, it's very difficult. The question I got from the audience that was at your keynote was, on a dollar per mile basis, what is the fundamental difference on your stack and your software approach to Tesla's vision-based approach?
Ours is also vision-based. Of course, we have in addition to vision, we also have radar and lidar. But otherwise, the approach is rather similar. I think Elon's approach is about as state-of-the-art as anybody knows of autonomous driving and robotics. And so it's a stack that's hard to criticize. I wouldn't criticize it. I would just encourage them to continue to do what they're doing. They're doing a great job.
Physical AI for you is, and forgive my pronunciation, but Erlangen manufacturing site. When's that real? It's the same question.
I mean, in contrast to the side you was talking about before, this one exists. I mean, we are ramping up. We are automating it as we speak. We're using technology. I showcased some of that, and we are really deploying step by step now on that very same side this technology we was talking about, the AI brain, the digital twin composer, real worlds and real time connectivity to what happens on the shop floor, so you can act and drive basically dynamically what's happening on the shop floor. So, and we will talk about more along 2026.
And so cool. Siemens is using Nvidia technology in the Siemens factory.
Yes.
Nvidia is using Siemens technology in our Foxconn Nvidia factory. And so, it's a great partnership.
Jensen, you are one of the most important and biggest employers in Silicon Valley. I've been down to Santa Clara to see you. You are a leader of the technology industry right now. The industry and those of us that live in California are reviewing the billionaires tax. The question that a lot of people submitted to me to ask you is, how does that impact that talent pool and the industry and Silicon Valley? Is it something that's of concern to you, or it is not?
I got to tell you, I haven't thought about it even once. We work in Silicon Valley because that's where the talent pool is, and we have offices all over the world wherever there's talent. We have offices. We have office in Germany. We have office in all over the world, and so we chose to live in Silicon Valley, and whatever taxes I guess they would like to apply, so be it. And, I'm perfectly fine with it. It never crossed my mind once.
I appreciate the answer, and again, it's right now in the technology industry. It's what people are reflecting on. We've had
not this person.
Not this person.
Yeah, this person is trying to build the future of AI.
And that's what the conversation was about today. Roland Busch, Siemens CEO, Jensen Huang, Nvidia CEO. Thank you very much for your time. I'll send it back to the team in Washington, D.C.
Ed Ludlow, many thanks, and what a fascinating conversation, one that you'll only hear on Bloomberg TV and radio with Jensen Huang and, of course, the CEO of Siemens, Roland Busch. I'm Joe Mathieu in Washington alongside Tyler Kendall with our eyes on Nvidia shares. Not moving a lot, interestingly, Tyler, despite the incredible amount of news that came out of the Consumer Electronics Show. It's essentially flat, down 10 cents right now, $188. But we are seeing other stocks in the space move. Micron Technology and some of the other storage companies they were talking about. It just seems to be to the moon.
Right. Also, some movement when it comes to energy and cooling, considering that you just heard Jensen Huang there talking about the need for other energy investments in order to fuel just the incredible demand that we see from data centers and AI. And that's why we often hear this need that it needs to go, beyond those typical sources of energy. That's why nuclear comes into the picture a lot.
Nuclear comes into the picture. Everyone's talking about Caterpillar with gas generators, and a lot of players that you might not assume are playing into the AI space. We're going to talk about what we just learned and take a bigger picture view at what came out of CES, specifically when it comes to Nvidia and AI, when we spend some time with Mike Shepard, coming up next here on Balance of Power.
As Joe Mathieu mentioned, we have brought in our resident expert here to our D.C. studio to help us unpack that entire interview that you just heard. Micheal Shepard, Bloomberg senior editor for technology and strategic industry, joins us now. So, Mike, let's do big picture, because the through line has been this assertion that the AI boom is here to stay. How did we hear that case made during CES so far this week?
Well, we've heard it not only from Jensen Huang, but also from Lisa Su, the head of Advanced Micro Devices, the arch rival to Nvidia, and both are really making the case that the sky is the limit right now for compute demand connected not only to artificial intelligence, but other business data processing needs. And therefore, they see more demand for their chips, and not only for the ways that we were just talking about with AI, the way you and I might think about it in terms of a chatbot or something agentic, but actually in industrial applications, like we just heard in the interview with the Siemens CEO alongside Jensen Huang of Nvidia, where they are making the case that, look, AI will go into industrial processes to the factory floor to make process there, to make the functioning of machines there much more efficient and perhaps less demanding on a workforce that is struggling to find people to staff those kinds of factory jobs, not only here in the U.S., but elsewhere in the world. And we also saw Jensen yesterday during his presentation at CES, his nearly 90-minute keynote, he brought robots onto the stage. And he talked about this autonomous driving platform that is taking it a step further by actually introducing thinking and reasoning into the software that would drive a self-driven or autonomous vehicle.
And that goes a long way to speaking to the use cases. You know, how is this going to change my life and make me more productive? But you reached for something important. The fact of the matter is that the enterprise use case might be a bigger story at this stage of the AI rollout. And when he starts talking about Rubin, 10 times the efficiency of Blackwell, that would actually increase customers' revenues and lower their costs. This is moving faster than we can keep up with. Will this next generation of chips increase productivity in AI?
Well, that is certainly the case that Jensen Huang is making, and actually the same case that Lisa Su made with AMD's own version, its very latest generation of AI chips as well. That, look, we have a technology here that we can offer to businesses that increases their productivity, that does processing a lot faster. And you heard Jensen talking about a 10x increase in terms of efficiency, but he's also talking about energy efficiency as well, Joe. And that is important. And that is what Tyler was alluding to at the top of the segment, seeing the cooling stocks go down. Jensen is talking about how this will require less in terms of cooling as well. So it's for businesses that are looking for whether this is the time to make the jump, to really make this investment, to start turning more to artificial intelligence to help power a lot of their internal processes. Vera Rubin, in Jensen Huang's view, is the reason to make that leap.
I actually loved how Ed Ludlow framed that question. He asked him about the anxiety around energy efficiency. And then you heard Jensen Huang in his answer talk about the White House's energy policies. He touted President Trump's, what I believe he called this energy first agenda that we often hear from the administration. Do we know anything about the dialogue between the Trump administration and these tech companies, and the idea that when they are using so much energy, what does that actually mean for American consumers?
Well, one of the most consistent messages that we have been hearing from Jensen Huang and his counterparts in Silicon Valley, especially those that are investing in heavily the artificial intelligence area, is the need for more energy and more energy efficiency and more energy supply across the board. It is something that, you know, really came shining through in the president's AI action plan, and it is something that Jensen Huang has brought up with the president. The two men talk frequently, sometimes by phone, late at night. Jensen has told reporters. And so we know that there is this kinship with the administration, especially with Nvidia, but also Lisa Su mentioned during her interview with Ed, her contacts with the Trump administration, and again, stressing the importance of energy. But this also touches, Tyler, on that key political question about energy availability and pricing, because it is something that is hitting home for many consumers. And the concern that the AI revolution and the AI boom may actually come at something of a cost to people who are hearing about the AI uptake across businesses, but then may be feeling the pain in their electricity bills.
Where's Wall Street on all of this? Shep, I know you're not a stock analyst, and we're loath to try to turn you into one, but this is a stock that's been moribund since August. It topped out above $200, Nvidia that is, back in October. But we're still looking at 180 something like we were at the end of the summer here, despite a remarkable story to tell. We go back to the GTC conference here in Washington. That was right when things kind of peaked. But the company has been out with a raft of news ever since then, and it's got a super attractive price to earnings ratio. How did this go from being the most wanted stock to one that's been kind of forgotten for a minute?
A lot of it has to do, Joe, with the fear and loathing surrounding the AI trade and the concern that maybe some of the investment is a little bit too enthusiastic, and that there may not be enough return yet to show in terms of something that's profitable from putting all that money into artificial intelligence, into the data centers, into whatever companies may be thinking about doing with it, that it may take too long to realize, at least for now. And Joe, I'll add to that what you were saying about Nvidia. They had a really strong earnings report in late November. And then just today, we heard their CFO say that the projections that you heard at the end of October, $500 billion in revenue, she is saying, look, we're going to see even more than that. It has gotten even more bullish than you just heard a few months ago. Customer demand is really strong. And that is something that Jensen Huang emphasized yesterday after his keynote, that, look, demand for Vera Rubin is very strong, and they're expecting to see a lot of buyers. And they're also expecting to see a lot of buyers for even the earlier generations, the H200, with their hopes to get back into the China market as well. So this is a company that, you know, has a story to tell, but investors are a little wary now of whether this story has been too good to be true.
Well, in our final minute, let's hit on some of those China headlines, since you just alluded to them there. Nvidia says strong demand from Chinese customers, and Nvidia says not directly communicating with the Chinese government. Of course, we know the company has been lobbying the Trump administration when it comes to those export controls. Where does this actually stand right now?
Well, it's the question of the moment, and it really is how quickly will the Trump administration start issuing the actual formal licenses permitting the company to start shipping its H200 chips to Chinese customers? But then there is the other question, Tyler, and that is whether China's government will allow its companies to start buying those chips. And the X factor in it is whether China is trying to keep Nvidia out of the domestic market so that it can promote its own chip champions. And that includes Huawei, which is one of Nvidia's arch rivals on the global stage, but also other local companies like SMIC and Cambricon as well that have shown some increasing aptitude with producing AI chips. Certainly not yet at the quality level of, say, a Vera Rubin, but something that, if compiled en masse in a low-cost energy environment like China's, you could actually see some results with inference and perhaps even with training of AI models.
So when do we get data centers in space? We're done with flying cars. Now it's data centers in space. Ed, I love that he asked the question. Elon Musk can't talk about it enough. And it sounded a lot to me like Jensen Huang is talking to Elon Musk about making these orders real.
Well, and they do talk regularly. And Joe, you'll remember that during the U.S.-Saudi investment conference here in Washington, the two men shared a stage together.
That's right.
And were interviewed together by one of the organizers. So more to tell on that, certainly, Joe.
You're going to be the first journalist in space to visit one of these things, right?
If not you.
I'm not going anywhere near it. I just make that clear. That's for Shep and Tyler. Thanks to Micheal, Shepard. As always, Tyler and I will meet you back here on the late edition of Balance of Power with a lot more to talk about from the nation's capital, right here on Bloomberg TV and radio.